10 Crazy Ancient Weapons You've Never Heard of. Slings and crossbows have a specific basic mechanical appeal that can't be coordinated by the most progressive rockets and rifles of today. Blades and shields additionally evoke pictures of a time long since past of gallantry and honor when battle was battled vis-a-vis between people who'd committed their lives and notorieties to their capacities on the field of battle. We invest so much energy enveloped with these generalizations that we regularly overlook that, much the same as now, fighting in the past was continually evolving. Armed forces were continually trying new strategies and new weapons to get one over on the enemy. One of the best instances of this was the Battle of Agincourt. The English armed force, made up fundamentally of labourer troopers with long bows, pulverized the respectable French knights with their defensive layer-penetrating bodkin bolts. At that point the English laid into the French in a skirmish, utilizing hammers to refute the French defensive layer or simply cutting blades through the openings in their plate mail. But antiquated fighting was loaded with weapons significantly more stunning and more fascinating than this, as individuals from societies around the globe contrived remarkable approaches to hurt their foes. Here are 10 insane antiquated weapons you've likely never known about. 10 Man Catcher. Probably the most bizarre weapon in history was more usually utilized in city roads instead of on the field of fight, the man catcher. Strangely, it was one of only a handful, barely any, archaic weapons that was planned explicitly to cripple a rival without murdering or harming him. While some man catchers had spikes on them, which were unmistakably intended to cause injury, most by far were basically a wooden shaft with a two-dimensional blunted fork toward the end. They were utilized continuously guardians and watchmen of archaic towns to nail down the appendages of instigators or crooks. This limited them until help showed up or they quieted down. The man catcher was periodically utilized on the field of fight, however this was considerably less regular. These man catchers were more intricate, frequently including honed spikes and spring-stacked ways to trap casualties' limbs. They were at times used to drag enemies from their ponies, however such a move would have taken significant expertise. They were all the more usually used to hold onto rich aristocrats and take them prisoner. At the point when the fight was finished, they could be recovered for a lot of money. There are no solid sources on when man catchers were first utilized, however they were utilized all through the Middle Ages over the world, from Europe to Japan. They proceeded as a law requirement device well into the 1600s. 9. Bagh Nakh. The Bagh Nakh, tiger's paw, was an unordinary weapon imagined in India. Albeit nobody knows without a doubt when it originally showed up, it developed in fame in the wake of being received by the Nihang Sikh warriors at some point after 1500. In short, it was a type of knuckle duster, effectively covered in the palm and comprised of 4 or 5 metal paws that were utilized to cut at the adversary. Nihang Sikhs regularly conveyed them in their turbans as hidden weapons, yet additionally faced with them in conflict on occasion. They were likewise utilized as weapons of naughty assault and even death. Broadly, a Bagh Nakh was utilized in the gathering between General Afzal Khan and Emperor Shivaji. Both men had consented to meet unarmed, however Shivaji carried reinforcement and a Bagh Nakh with him in the event of some unforeseen issue. At the point when Khan assaulted Shivaji suddenly, Shivaji executed Khan with a Bagh Nakh and spared his own life. 8. Caltrop. In spite of being a moderately dark weapon even today, the Caltrop has been utilized with significant accomplishment for in any event 2,000 years. In its fundamental structure, a caltrop is a bit of iron designed into 4 similarly long points. It is amassed so that in the event that it is dropped on the ground, a point faces straight up. This development made them moderately simple to rapidly dissipate over a wide region on the grounds that no ability was needed to lay them. The first record of caltrop use originates from the Roman Empire when Roman journalists talked about the utilization of murex ferius, rough things of iron, to upset the pony-drawn chariots utilized by different societies across Europe at that point. They were utilized as right on time as the Battle of Kari in 53 BC, however accounts that may highlight caltrops date as far back as Alexander's missions in Persia around 331 BC. It was utilized over the world, from Japan, where the spikes were once in a while longer than 2.5 centimeters, 1 in, to India, where huge, expound caltrops were utilized to end the charges of war elephants. Their use declined with the innovation of explosive, yet they were as yet utilized on uncommon events. Indeed, they are still sent today. They were utilized as people-killing weapons in the Korean War to forestall ambushes and have been utilized into the 21st century to kill vehicles. 7. Bill hook. Advancing from the farming bill snare, the military bill snare, in some cases called the English bill or simply the bill, was a moderately normal weapon in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Its adaptability and straightforward development settled on it the weapon of decision of numerous helpless fighters or drafted peasants. Its configuration changed fundamentally across Europe, however it was reliably a multi-purpose weapon. Its expansive, Bended head could be utilized to cut along these lines to a glaive, while the little snare on the end could get the edges of defensive layer plate and drag adversaries to the ground or off their mounts. Afterward, charge snares likewise had a long spike on top that permitted them to be utilized as lances or pikes if needed. They dropped out of style across Europe during the 1500s, supplanted by the pike and arquebus. Regardless of this, proficient fighters in England stayed with the old bill and bow mix as late as the Battle of Flodden, by which time the Scots had since quite a while ago surrendered the bill snare. Instances of English bills have even been found in Jamestown, proposing that they were as yet being used as late as 1607. Six-lantern shield. At the beginning of the Renaissance, Italy was the spot to be. Regardless of whether you were keen on workmanship, science, or designing, the world's ideal and most splendid were assembled in the Italian states, where their work was upheld by well-off rulers and merchants. The best, and most stunningly styled, protection was made in Italy, particularly in Milan. Europe's most extravagant and most style-cognizant all had their defensive layer made by Italian smiths. It ought to be nothing unexpected then that one of the weirdest and most expansive shields in mankind's set of experiences was planned in Renaissance Italy. At that point, there was a solid dueling society among the nation's childhood. Numerous youngsters would go out after dull to raise a ruckus in the city or to participate in pre-arranged duels. Signaled the innovation of the light shield. At first, lamp shields were just shields that had a snare or other secure spot to affix a lamp so the individuals who dueled after dull could at present observe. The idea created after some time, nonetheless, and by the stature of the Renaissance, the most developed light shields had a wide range of highlights: serrated gauntlets intended to catch and break an adversary's blade, spikes that extended out of the shield's front, and even blade-cutting edges that were produced into the shield, making it a weapon in itself. 5. Their weirdest element, in any case, was a little fold secured by a bit of calfskin. The client mounted a light behind this fold. As indicated by dueling practice books from the time, these lamp folds could be utilized to daze an adversary when absolutely necessary, briefly putting them down and out. 5. Fletched Javelin. A large portion of us realize that spears were usually utilized over the Greek and Roman universes. Nonetheless, many don't realize that spears were utilized well into the Middle Age time frame and beyond. In actuality, archaic lances were further developed than their old partners and were significantly more precise. These unique archaic weapons, frequently called fletched spears, had plumed fletchings at the base of their poles which steadied the lance in flight. They took after Goliath bolts and showed up semi-routinely in Middle Age craftsmanship. They were likewise manufactured uniquely in contrast to customary lances, with crafters utilizing lighter, less strong wood, however bigger and heavier heads to cause more harm on sway. They discovered extensively more use in the early Middle Age time frame, which at that point declined as the prominence of the longbow and crossbow grew. The fletched spear was likewise utilized in different pieces of the world. In the Americas, local societies utilized an exceptional sort of sling known as an atlatl. This wooden device could be utilized to dispatch a fletched lance with double the quality of a customary toss just by flicking the wrist. A comparative cowhide sling was utilized by the antiquated Greeks to dispatch spears, yet that halted well before the Middle Ages. There isn't a definite term for these archaic lances, however they are most usually alluded to as either fletched lances or war darts. As they are tossed and have fletchings, they are actually dashes. They most likely wouldn't be acknowledged by your nearby darts club, however. 4. Chakram. Tossing blades includes conspicuously in our TV and computer games, yet the Indian identical, a fight quoit, is much more unusual. A honed metal circle, the chakram, or chakar, is viably a war frisbee. It has been utilized by the itinerant Akali Nihang Sikhs for many years, however the most seasoned records of its utilization go back over 2,000 years. They can fluctuate essentially in size, from minimal more extensive than a hand to over 0.6 meters, 2 feet. Wide. They can be tossed from numerous points of view. The most widely recognized strategy is to turn the plate on the finger and rapidly discharge it, however underarm tosses, which dispatch the circle vertically, are likewise notable. They can be tossed progressing and, for additional power, by utilizing inclining hurls that construct a ton of speed. In fight, they were conveyed as once huge mob by officers in the back positions, who dispatched them high into the air to fall on their foes' heads. These weapons were conveyed into fight on the warrior's arm, permitting him to convey up to 12 all at once. Be that as it may, the biggest ones were worn around the neck. They were additionally valuable in skirmish battle, slicing any foe who attempted to hook them. If necessary, they could even be utilized as tight situation weapons. 3. Nets have been utilized in fighting by a wide range of societies for centuries, yet they arrived at the tallness of their ubiquity in the gladiatorial fields of antiquated Rome. The fighter games started as reenactments of genuine fights, with most warriors wearing the rigging of either Romans or their shared adversaries. After some time, be that as it may, the warrior games, and the combatant classes, built up a culture of their own. Most fighters wore enormous, expound head protectors including everything from creature peaks to misrepresented trims. While these protective caps were noteworthy, they could likewise put the contender off guard, particularly when set in opposition to a retirius. A retirius was a combatant who took to the field with a pike and a net. He utilized his net to get his rival's head protector and drag him down. Retirii were the absolute most famous warriors in Old Rome and were often fan favorites. As they required almost no reinforcement and their weapons were exceptionally modest, they were likewise probably the most widely recognized. Truth be told, a combatant class showed up exclusively to counter the adequacy of the retirii. This class, known as the secutor, wore an extremely fundamental protective cap with no peak so it couldn't be gotten by the retirii's net. The secutor's cap additionally had little eye gaps with the goal that the pike couldn't be pushed into his eyes. By the finish of the main century AD, this blending was one of the most mainstream in the gladiatorial world. It remained so until the decrease of the Roman Empire. 2. Khopesh. The Khopesh is probably the most established weapon of war in mankind's set of experiences to be made totally of metal. The primary models were produced in Mesopotamia around 2500 BC. The plan immediately spread to Egypt, where it turned into the supported weapon of the warrior class, and, apparently, the world's first sword. Swords as we remember them today got regular in the 16th century BC, however before at that point, the Khopesh ruled the Near East. Regardless of whether the Khopesh is a blade, nonetheless, is still discussed. It developed from the sickle, a homestead execute, and the hatchet, which individuals have begun to use in warfare. The result was an abnormal-looking, bended weapon with a sharp, hatchet-like edge and a robust measure of metal behind it, making it similarly as great at slamming through covering as it was at cutting. Its honed tip implied that it could likewise be utilized as a wounding weapon. The Khopesh was one of the most exceptional weapons of its age, yet it was additionally unimaginably costly to make. Just expert warriors and honorability could bear to possess one, so it immediately turned into an image of Egypt's decision elite. As time went on, increasingly more Khopeshes were made with blunted edges, apparently intended to fill in as enhancements or as grave merchandise. When the time of pharaohs finished, these weapons were even every now and again showing up in the burial chambers of the powerful rulers themselves. 1. Kapinga. Utilizing a tossing blade requires a reasonable piece of expertise. Obviously, the client should have the option to toss the weapon precisely, which takes practice all alone. Yet, he additionally needs to pass judgment on the separation and work out how to toss the cutting edge with the goal that the sharp end hits the target. Many societies around the globe have utilized different advancements to get around this. Like the previously mentioned Chakram, the Japanese shuriken is destructive regardless of which part of the weapon hits the objective, while the boomerang has a lot bigger surface region that can cause damage. The Azande individuals of Africa tackled this issue in an alternate manner. They made a tossing blade, the kapinga, with various sharp edges. The cutting edges are situated so the tragic foe will be hit by a honed edge regardless of how the blade is tossed. They were most usually tossed overhead, however they could likewise be tossed sidearm, a low toss which meant to take out the objective's legs. The kapinga was a weapon of distinction, a superficial point of interest that was just given to individuals of riches and notoriety, or to proficient warriors. The option to deliver them had a place with a solitary group, the avangara, and they were in some cases part of the share given at a wedding. 10. They were esteemed to the point that when they were utilized, warriors were relied upon to yell that they were tossing their blade to demonstrate they weren't simply disposing of it inefficiently.